All right, YouTube, the evangelicals are crying, and once again, as before, late last year, I'm drinking their tears on CNN and elsewhere because all the evangelicals, the bigots, are flipping out right now, as they always do whenever there's any sort of movement on any front against their traditionalist, moralist bullshit. Right here, and we'll go. Same-sex couples to get federal benefits. Recognition will affect, oh no, all 50 states. Oh no, gay people who move to Oklahoma will be federally recognized. My God, Alabama and Mississippi. Reading here, the U.S. government will recognize same-sex marriages as equal to traditional marriages in all federal matters, including bankruptcies, prison visits, survivor benefits. And of course, this is through Eric Holder, who I don't like, who is a complete asshole. Eric Holder is a completely corrupt and utterly a liar. But this is a good decision from the Justice Department, from the Attorney General, regardless of his own personal problems with lying to people and so forth, specifically about things like the NSA in Benghazi. But here you have a situation where the moralists and the evangelicals, who are steadily losing influence in the United States, are claiming that this will somehow endanger their ability to get a traditional, a straight marriage, which isn't true. It makes no sense. All this is doing, from, again, anyone who understands the Constitution, it simply regards people as equal. This is essentially a step to prevent this level of discrimination against people whose marriages are now fully legal, they're fully licensed, they're fully recognized by their states that they're having these marriages performed in. To prevent federal recognition of this would be to discriminate not only against the individuals getting these marriages, but against the constituencies of the states in which they have become legal, which is now a large proportion of the population, almost 50%. Actually, I believe it might actually be over 50% of the population now, because California, of course, and Utah and Oklahoma as well, they have smaller populations, but that's 3 more states where it's legal. There are another half dozen states with similar issues going up, either for their state Supreme Courts, or for voter ratification, essentially repealing prohibitions against it and or legalizing it. And through other means, there are many states right now that in this next year, 2004, could see it become legal, if it doesn't become federally legal. I think it'll take a few more states to reach that sort of a tipping point. But all the evangelicals are crazed and think this is going to cause disaster, it's going to cause destruction. All this is a return to traditional constitutionalism pre-temperance movement. All, or almost all, of the moral laws in this country, this as it regards drugs, as it regards sexual behavior, as it regards marital relationship, morals, things of that nature, alcohol prohibition, even gun laws. All of these things are tied to the temperance movement. I've explained this in depth before. I'm actually writing an entire segment of my new book on this exact topic. The temperance movement and all of its associated acts were eugenics-era programs specifically designed to sort of clean up society and make it more morally decent. The problem being, the original temperance movement was ironically largely sponsored by feminists and revolved around, we want our husbands not to come home drunk and chewing tobacco, which I don't think that we should ban these things, but it sounds like at least a morally sound movement, and got co-opted by people in business who were going at each other like wolves, trying to essentially ban each other's businesses on the basis that they were immoral, and by other groups, especially the eugenicists, which were associated with this movement thereafter. All of these things, alcohol prohibition. The stated goal of alcohol prohibition from the temperance movement was to prevent people from becoming alcoholics, and it didn't work. because when it became prohibited, people started getting much more powerful alcohol because they couldn't even get like low alcohol beers and wines anymore. Instead, they were getting bathtub moonshine, which make people go blind. Maybe it contained methanol and poisoned them. All sorts of problems, and they became alcoholics. And they couldn't get treatment for that. They just got it under the table, or they got a medical prescription for medicinal purpose, medicinal brandy or medicinal rum or whiskey, which lots of people got that medicinal hard liquor and became alcoholics. The drug war dates to the temperance movement. Prohibiting marijuana and all of these drugs has caused addiction rates to skyrocket. And it's also caused us to spend a lot of money trying to fight drugs, which are essentially boogeymen. Not many people use things like heroin and crack, and fewer still would use them if we treated the addicts rather than going after them and throwing them in prison so that the first thing they do when they get out is trying to go get a fix. Sexual moral laws. The anti-sodomy laws, which have now been rendered moot. They've been struck down entirely. There are still states with these laws on the books. They're not enforced. They can't be enforced legally, but they're still technically on the books. And you know that they keep them there as a matter of principle, because these people, the moralists, inherited the temperance movement. They weren't the primary sponsors of it in the first place. Largely the feminists were, and some of the eugenicists. The moralists went along with it, and they retain it to this day. And their line is, if the nation becomes less evangelical, that there's a problem. Well, the nation was never an evangelical nation before the temperance movement. They've created a false situation. They've tried to convince everyone that the ultimate level of religiosity that you see from the early 1900s to roughly the 1990s is normal for this country. That it's always been this way. We're a God-fearing nation. Guess what? Before the late 1800s, when these movements began to blossom, religion was not considered overly important by the average American. Religion was not seen as the ultimate arbiter of American life. Patriotism was, and it was completely divorced. Yes, people said, yes, we love God, God loves our country. Yes, they didn't drag religion into it. They simply said God did, Jesus did, Jehovah did, whatever other god they happened to worship did. And then in the Jews' case, they were there too. And there were also people by that time from China and other places who had their own religions, and nobody largely cared. Nobody went on a pogrom against atheists in that time period. It was seen, specifically during the Founders' period, it was seen as relatively normal to be not only distrustful of organized religion, but openly disdainful of organized religion. These moralists and evangelicals who want to legislate based on their form of morality are doing exactly that. It's their morality. It's not even a biblical understanding of this so-called God's morality, God's law, Jesus' law, the Bible's law, whatever you want to call it. This is their modern day, very new interpretation, and it's entirely relegated to the United States largely. It didn't even really spread to Protestants outside of the Western Hemisphere. It's essentially a pan-United States moral movement. It's evangelical. It's the Baptists and the Pentecostals and groups like this. Well, guess what? The United States was not like that before the temperance era. Christians in that pre-temperance period did not care if you were from a different sect, or you didn't really care about organized religion. They didn't see you as a threat. Because people went to church, people went home, and then people did their own thing. You didn't have religion and politics to that great an extent. Why? Because the founders themselves had told everyone already that it was a bad idea for the two to mix. That's why there's an implicit separation of church and state written into the Constitution. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. The idea was the state will not establish an actual, an organized religion as the sole or preferred or only tolerated religious group. They did this because they didn't like organized religion. If you go back through the Federalist Papers and the words of our founders, you'll find most of these people are agnostics and deists. They either believe in sort of a distant God that sort of forgives everyone and doesn't really care what's going on, or they're agnostic and they sort of question even the existence of God. Thomas Jefferson is probably best labeled an agnostic, not an atheist. None of these people were atheists, and I'll disagree with the atheist community. I don't think any of the founders were atheistic. I think they were anti-religious. I think some of them, if you read what they said, were more anti-religious than the average anti-theist is nowadays. So when people say, well, God's going to smite the nation because gay marriage, God's going to smite the nation because marijuana legalization, God's going to smite the nation because of insert imagined moral ill here, what they're doing is superimposing an early 1900s temperance movement evangelical view, which is completely based on Americana. It's completely based on the notion that America is the shining city on the hill of Jesus. They're superimposing that onto the legal system in a way that is completely different from how the United States operated from the 1700s until the temperance movement began. We've now lived almost half of our nation's history under post-temperance era nonsense. What you see now is people are getting tired of it because they realize that discriminating against gays goes against the Constitution. Regardless of what your own moral feelings are on the topic of homosexuals, it violates the Constitution. We're returning to the idea, and the libertarian movement is also part of this, that the Constitution, the respect for other people, the respect for their equality and their integrity is above any organized religion. It is the religion of the United States. It's why the nation was founded. We've come to the conclusion now, I think we're moving towards, where we understand the Constitution, especially things like privacy, are above whatever current government may be reigning. That the government can be wrong, the government can be in violation of the Constitution, and it's people's time to wake up and call them out for it. So what you see is not some vapid left-wing movement where they're trying to degenerate our children and they're trying to ban Jesus from the public square. We're returning to the constitutional principles upon which this country operated during its best times. That's what we're returning to. You don't see most of these moral little problems up until about the mid-1800s, and then it boils over. Then it kind of goes away, then it comes back as the temperance movement, and basically it was the same populism as before, only now they dragged an element of pseudoscience into it, and so everyone sort of agreed with it. I can remember even up here in New England, where people are more balanced in their approach about such philosophies, UVM was sterilizing Native Americans, and it was part of the eugenics program up until the 1970s, when all of these things started to die down and people stopped wanting to sterilize minorities and people stopped wanting to, see KKK members burning people, and hanging them off of trees. We have entered a modern period now where we are returning to the roots of our nation. This is not intrinsically bad. It's not anti-religious. The founders were. This isn't particularly anti-religious. There are religions that don't care if you're gay. And what the evangelicals have set up is a false principle by which they tell you that if you support gay marriage, you are against God. This completely ignores the Unitarian Christians, who don't give a crap, the Episcopal Christians, who don't give a crap, the Jews, the liberal Jews, openly smile on homosexuality, and they're supposedly God's chosen people, according to the Bible, according to the evangelicals, who suck up to Israel constantly, and they don't care if you're gay. The Islamists and the evangelicals are almost alone in this world in condemning this behavior. There's even a less stricture in Eastern religions than there are in Islam and evangelical Christianity, and the evangelicals that have a problem with this are largely concentrated in the southern and midwestern United States. It's a very small area of the world's surface, it's a very small proportion of the world's population, and they act as though their modern interpretation of a fairly modern translation of the Bible, leaving out all of the Apocrypha and mistranslated several times and transferred into Americana, is the one inalienable truth of God. And they're wrong. And people are seeing that they're wrong. That's why it's dying out. I made a blog post over a year ago about the thinning of the United States Bible Belt. The Baptist Belt it stretches kind of up into the Midwest because some of those groups are just as bad. The Baptist belt of the Deep South has been shrinking for decades, especially since the 90s. It's being taken over in the South by Catholicism and in the North by essentially a lack of care about religion. People are moving back towards the founding principles of the country, which is it doesn't matter what religion you're part of. If you believe in God, great. If you go to church, that's fine. But you can't use it to discriminate against other people any more than these same Christians. This will be my parting word. These same Christians, these same evangelicals that represent a minority of the world's Christian faith, that want to legislate morality based on the fact that they are a relatively large group within the United States, would turn around and cry foul if atheists were the majority and attempted to legislate morality based on secular reason. They would cry foul. It's the same hypocrisy as it always has been in the past. But I'm right now drinking evangelical tears. And you should join me in doing so. I'll post a link to the story in the description because it's really, really funny. That's about all. Peace out.